Hi, this is Pragati. In today's video, we'll be talking to Shivani Pandey, who was awarded the prestigious J.N. Tata Scholarship to pursue her master's at the London School of Economics and is currently a pre-doctoral student at Princeton University. Hi, Shivani. Could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Shivani. I did my economics honors from Lady Shri Ram College in Delhi University. Right after that, I went on to do my master's in economics from the London School of Economics. Um, After graduating, I worked as a research assistant for two development economists. One of them is at the University of Maryland. His name is Professor M.R. Sharan, and the other is Professor Siddharth George, who is now at NUS. And after 1 year of working in Patna in Bihar, I moved to the US to work as a pre-doctoral research assistant at Princeton for Professor Owen Zadar. I applied for PhD programs last fall, and I'm waiting to hear back, and I hope to start my PhD this fall.
So, Shivani, what was your motivation behind applying for a master's outside India?
There were multiple reasons. The first reason was that I was really not happy with the way we were taught things in my undergrad, and I really just wanted better quality education, whatever that means. Another factor was that I knew that I wanted to eventually get a PhD from the US. And a bunch of my college seniors had told me that Indian degrees are not as well recognized in the US as, say, an LSE is. So having a good brand name really helps. And by that time, I had also learned that doing these pre-doc positions have almost become a prerequisite at this point, at least for people in applied micro, applied macro fields. And again, I could not have imagined getting the Princeton position if I did not have an LSE master's. So it was a bunch of these factors that I decided to apply. I also applied to DSC, so my mind wasn't fully made up. And in the end, I got a bit of scholarship. I have a few relatives in London that I could live with. So it just made sense to go for the master's instead. Yeah.
So, why UK and why not the US?
One of the biggest reasons why I chose Europe generally over the US was because Europe has more scholarship opportunities uh, relative to the US. The LSE, Oxford, Cambridge, Geneva Graduate Institute, all of them have tons of scholarships that the college themselves provide. They all offer financial aid, plus there were specific scholarships that are only available if you go to a college in the UK, like the Commonwealth Scholarship. Plus, I think funding was really important to me, and most of the US master's programs just stated on their website that they offer no financial aid to master's students. That was definitely one of the biggest factors. And another reason, like I said, was that I knew that eventually I wanted to get my PhD from a US university. So I also wanted to spend like 1 year outside it because I knew eventually I would come here anyway.
What is the application process like the requirements, scholarship, and the timeline for the application process?
If you go to my LinkedIn, I have another video where I go into much more detail of how to apply and what the requirements are. But just in a nutshell, in order to apply to any masters abroad for that matter, you need a couple of things. You need a GRE score. You need 2 to 3 recommendation letters from your professors or any internship mentor that you've had. You need to write a statement of purpose explaining why do you want to do this master's program, why is economics fascinating to you, stuff like that. For the UK, you also have to give the IELTS or the TOEFL, which is more of a visa requirement than a college specific requirement. So you can also give the TOEFL or IELTS after you've gotten an acceptance letter from the college, which is what I did. And and transcripts and CV. Um, Transcripts are just your undergrad transcripts showing all your grades and the courses you took, and finally a CV with all of your experiences thus far. So I mean, I don't know if it's a good thing necessarily, but they look at you comprehensively. So it's a package of all of these things that determine whether you get in or not. And when it comes to funding opportunities, most of the scholarships, their applications open much later than the college applications. So ideally, you should apply between October to December, and most scholarship portals start opening up in January or February and go until March or April. But there is one exception. The Commonwealth application is pretty early on. They usually have like an end of November deadline or early December deadline. And another issue with Commonwealth is that they require you to have an acceptance letter before you can apply, which means that if you do want to get that scholarship, you should apply to LSE almost as soon as the applications open up, which is in October. So if you apply early October, they give you a decision within 30 days. And if you get accepted, you can then use that acceptance to apply for the Commonwealth scholarship. But this is the general timeline.
Who did you approach for the letter of recommendations? Was it your college professors?
Yeah, so I think it's important to get letters which are extremely personalized, where professors really know you and can speak about your credentials in detail. I think the strength of a letter is determined by who is writing it and how long the letter is. Because the longer it is means that they really do, think of you highly, which is why they took out the time to write a long letter for you. And obviously, how well known the professor is helps, but that's a bit hard if you're applying from, a DU college, because most of our professors are not as well recognized in the UK and US. So I just approached like my senior most professors, like the three associate professors at LSR that knew me really well, and I knew they would write a good letter for me. I also considered asking for my internship mentors for letters, but the general advice I got from everyone is that academic letters are preferred to professional ones. So I decided to just take letters from three of my professors instead of any like professional letter writer.
Can we discuss in detail what did you write in the statement of purpose?
Your statement of purpose is basically a chance for you to tell your story. But the important thing to remember is that they don't care that much about your personal life or, what happened to you. They really just want to know how passionate you are about economics and research in particular. And so my SOP started with I wrote 2 lines about the fact that I've moved around all my life. I am an army brat, so we kept moving every 2-3 years to a different city or town in India. And my SOP started with like a little bit of backstory where I explained how moving around exposed me to lots of different cultures. It showed me how drastically standard of living varied from place to place. And it sort of made me realize that one of the biggest factors driving these differences across different regions is just public policy and how effective it is. And then I went on to describe my experiences. I had interned for a think tank called Center for Civil Society. So I wrote a little bit about that. I had also interned at ISB, at their Public Policy Institute. I wrote a little bit about that work. I wrote about my coursework, the classes that excited me the most, whether it was political economy or like applied econometrics, which tells you the power of economics in answering questions of value. And in the end, I think I concluded with just writing a brief paragraph about why LSE in particular is a good fit for me. And so that involved writing things like there was a particular research center at LSE. They did lots of interesting work, and LSE would have been a good fit because I could then work for them. I mentioned the names of, I think, 2 or 3 professors whose research I find really interesting, and I would love for an opportunity to work with them eventually. But yeah, this was the general structure, and this is what most people follow. Another advice I got, but I don't know how true that is the UK is more crude in the sense that they really don't care about your personal backstory. But in the US, you can still afford to go into a bit more detail about your personal circumstances and how that motivated you to get into economics. The SOP is also a good place for you to mention any gaps in your application. So if you, I don't know, got a really low grade in a course, you can use that space to explain why that happened. Or if you took a gap year, that is the place to mention why you did it, or what was your motivation behind it.
Unlike India, where we have the option of just masters in economics, LSE offers various courses like specialization within different branches of economics. So, which are the ones most demanded by students, and which courses are most demanded by the job market in UK or anywhere else?
Okay. I think that, again, I can only speak for economics and not other fields. But within economics, it really comes down to what career path you want to take after your master's. I think the MSc in economics is the most demanded and has the biggest intake, because it really opens up pretty much any door for you. You can get an industry job, like a finance job or a consulting job. You can also get jobs with international organizations like the World Bank or IMF. And you can also apply to pre-doc positions or even directly apply to PhD programs if you want to. Then I think, to the best of my knowledge, there are a couple of other programs, like the Masters in Economics and Management is considered like a slightly easier version of the MSc in Economics. So if your aim is not really to do a PhD or anything super quant heavy and you just want a consulting job, then it might make more sense to go for that program instead. But
Is it like business economics?
it's similar to that, yeah. I think it's like they teach you the kind of micro and macro that you would learn at MBA programs. So it's not as rigorous. It's relatively easier. And if you don't want to pursue economics beyond that point, then it's probably best to do that. Then there is an MSc in development economics, which again is not as quant heavy. So if your background in undergrad has not been super, if you've not done lots of math courses, then again, the master's in development economics is a good option. And most people after that master's tend to work with think tanks or like international organizations like UN jobs or the World Bank and stuff like that. So if you want to stay within the development economics domain, that makes the most sense. But again, if you're just interested in development economics, then I think it's still better to do an MSc in economics and choose your elective as development economics, because it's more rigorous. It gives you a stronger quant background that most development economists use currently in their papers and the research that they do. There is one program which I think is probably one of the hardest to get into. It's the master's in EME, which is econometrics and mathematical economics. They only take about 30 students. It's a much smaller class, and the courses that you learn in this master's are comparable to the first year of a PhD program in the US. So it's all PhD level courses. It's pretty advanced. But again, I think the EME program only makes sense if you want to do a PhD in economics later on, because it's extremely rigorous. You learn lots of advanced concepts, which are not really valuable to you if you're just going to get a job, an industry job after that. I personally found the MSc Economics to be the perfect balance because it gives you access to pretty much any job that an economics majors student would get. And it's not super easy, it's not super hard. It's like right in the middle. And also because the class size is one of the biggest. I think it's probably the biggest class size across all master's program, and LSE it's also easier to get in my opinion.
How is the job market in UK different for the people graduating from, say, LSE versus the people coming from India, like graduating from India?
Okay, so I think the answer to this question depends on what do you want to do. If you want to get a PhD from the US, then I think it really helps to have a master's abroad because that allows you to get pre-doc positions or RA for professors, which is really helpful in your PhD applications. Another factor is, do you want to settle abroad? If you want to eventually move to the UK or the US, master's is the best and possibly the only option to immigrate and eventually get a job and settle there. But if none of these are your career goals, if you don't want to work in the US or UK, if you don't want to get a PhD, then I think you have pretty much the same options because a McKinsey will hire from DSC as well as an LSE. But the difference is that will be the McKinsey India office versus the UK office. So it really depends on your location preferences. And I think, at least in my case, it was really, really helpful to get the LSE Masters because the brand value has consistently helped me in this country. Because the professors at LSE are well known here. The professor that I work for at Princeton knew some of my professors at LSE that I think really helped. Plus, even when you're applying to PhDs, it's a lot easier for them to judge the grades at LSE, which they also trust more relative to someone coming from India. This is not to say that if you did an Indian master's, you cannot get into a US PhD program. It's just harder. And it's a lot more competitive versus having like a well-known master's. And when I say master's abroad, it needs to be a well-known program like LSE, UCL, Barcelona School of Economics or Paris School of Economics, like the good ones. If you just get any master's abroad, then I think the only benefit you get is that you get to settle abroad. But I don't think it will help you with like your career that much. Yeah.
What do you suggest how to make the best use of your time at LSE?
Well, the problem with LSE is that it's so hard that you barely have any time to make use of. But one thing I learned, and if I think about in retrospect, the most important thing in your master's program, whether you want to apply for jobs or eventually get a PhD, is to get good grades, which is really, really hard. And so at least, especially if you're coming from India, you're pretty used to being spoon-fed everything. You're given notes, you're given readings that someone compiles for you. The exams are also not that hard. But so it's a bit of a shock when you go to the LSE because everything is pretty independent. People who do really well invest a lot of time studying, they're very consistent. So most of your time will really just go into studying for your classes and making sure you get good grades. But then the other important things that you can do to really take advantage of LSE's resources will again depend on what do you want to do after the master's. So I, for instance, wanted to apply to pre-doc positions, which meant that the most important thing for me was to build good relationships with my professors. That meant, being active in classes, meeting them in their office hours, making sure they know who I am, just being a good student in general. But if, for instance, my aim was to apply to a investment banking job or like a consulting job, in that case, I would have spent more time going to some of the networking events that LSE organizes. Throughout the year, we have tons of like career fairs and just, like you'll have breakfast with finance people that the LSE is hosted where you can go network with people, build contacts. That's, I think, the other most useful way to use your time at the LSE if you want a job. because at the end of the day, I think contacts really help. And even especially if it's a particular company, if you really want to work for, say, an economics consultancy firm. I remember at some point I really wanted to work for Vivid Economics, which was this economics consultancy firm, which is now acquired by McKinsey. But one of the ways I could have made that happen was to talk to employees at the firm and, try to understand how their day looks like, the kind of work they do, so that when you eventually apply for that job, you know a lot more than the others. So really, if you're at LSE specifically, just study a lot, get good grades, and depending on what kind of job you want after that, build good relationships and contacts with those people. I think the only thing I'll say in the end is I'm happy to answer any questions anytime. I try my best. Like whenever someone reaches out to me at LinkedIn, I try my best to answer as quickly as possible. And most of the information is available online. It's really a matter of just go to the college websites. Pretty much everything you need to know is there. And keep in mind that there is no golden rule. Like, there is a lot of misinformation. People will tell you, do X to get into Y school. But I don't think that's true. They look at you in a very holistic way. They look at everything you've done. And just try. I think really the only thing that should be everyone's priority is to get good grades, but beyond that, everything else does not have as much of a weight as we think it does.